Welcome. Hello, I'm Lorelei. I'm an artist who writes, illustrates, and animates cozy little stories about a bookstore and its monster customers. And to me, it's pretty easy to see that books and reading have had a really big influence on my art as a whole. I've been thinking about expanding this channel for a while. I want to share more of my art process, share more of my stories, but also make some more relaxed content, specifically about my thoughts on the books that I read. I'm a big fan of booktube content and have been for a while. I've really found it to be one of my favorite corners of the internet, especially since I got back into reading, and it's something that I would really love to contribute to. I also think that my friends are sick of hearing me rant about my books on Goodreads, and so I think it's best I channel that energy into something else. At the moment, these are my favorite books of all time. I think a person's favorite books can say a lot about them, so I do wonder what kind of conclusions you'll be able to draw based on mine. Let's go chronologically in the order that I've read them. First, we've got Fangs by Sarah Andersen. We're starting with a graphic novel. It's kind of a genre that sparked a lot of reading for me when I was in high school especially. This book has a super simple premise. A vampire and a werewolf meet and fall in love, and we follow them through little illustrated moments in their relationship. It's a very short read. I've read it a few times, and it took about an hour to get through each time, and it doesn't really have a plot. It's more focused on the characters and the kind of silly, spooky vibes. It's such a peaceful, wistful book, very romantic and soft, and if you hear vampire and werewolf and think it will be scary in any way, it definitely isn't. In trying to describe it, I'd say that it's spooky in the way that jack-o'-lanterns and bedsheet ghosts are spooky. It's just cute and fun and nice. I would recommend this book as a great palette cleanser between denser books. Oh, and not to mention how beautiful the book is on the outside. It's this hardcover with a lovely red fabric, and the edges of the pages are all black. It gives it this really cool, I'm picking a mysterious novel off of Count Dracula's bookshelf vibe. It's an easygoing look at a relationship between two very different monsters, and I loved every second of it. Next on my list is One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. It had been a few years since high school, and I was really wanting to get back into reading. The gateway for me ended up being romance novels. I had read some Scarlett St. Clair books, which were fun, but I was also in the process of realizing that I was bi, so I wanted some sapphic romance to diversify my reading and explore that a bit more. And I truly wasn't even thinking when I picked up this book. I was just perusing the romance section, saw two women on the cover, and just bought it immediately. I didn't even read the back, which is one of the most unhinged things I think a reader can do. Sometimes I do that and I'm like, oh, I feel so dangerous. What am I getting into? But basically, if you must know what the book is about, this book asks the question, what if the relationship you imagined with that hot person you saw on the subway one time actually happened? It primarily takes place on the New York City subway, which ends up feeling like a character in and of itself with how it's written and explored. And speaking of characters, I was in love with every single character in this book. August and Jane, the two main characters, have such a great dynamic, and all of August's friends and roommates were so pleasant to read about. They felt like such a complex and caring group of friends. I also just love the found family trope. I can't get over it. Anytime I see it in a book, my heart swells. It's so wonderful. This level of character depth, where every character, regardless of how present they are in the story, feels fleshed out and thought through, is something I see in a lot of Casey McQuiston's books, which is just one of the things that has solidified them as my favorite author, full stop. Funny story, I actually visited New York for the first time last year with my mom and my sister, and we visited the flagship Barnes & Noble store at Union Square, and while I was there I came across a signed copy of One Last Stop. I was so excited, and when we were checking out, the cashier was like, oh yeah, we get those in all the time. Needless to say, I bought it, because we definitely don't get them all the time here in Canada, and now it has a special place on my shelf. Now for a bit of a vibe shift, the next on my list is Call Me By Your Name by André Aciman. This book is really different from the things I usually read. I know that most people have at least heard of it, but if you're not familiar, this book follows Elio, a boy living in the Italian countryside in the 80s, and Oliver, an exchange student coming to live with Elio's family for the summer. It explores a couple different themes, like the obsessive nature of crushes when you're young, shame surrounding sexuality, and the passage of time, and the way that memories can almost feel like dreams as we go on with our lives. It's not as linear as other books I've read. If I remember correctly, it's written from the perspective of Elio reflecting on this one summer many years after it had happened. It's a very thoughtful book. A lot of the feelings that Elio experienced were things that I could personally relate to, and I was kind of surprised by that. It just reminded me of what it was like to be a teenager with with a crush and how that would affect the way I went about my life. It's written in this really dreamy way that I think a lot of people might find a little bit pretentious, because Elio's father is a philosophy teacher, I believe. And so Elio, even though he's like 17 in this book, he kind of comes across as wiser than his years, while also still being a teenager and dealing with like teenage feelings. It's a really interesting choice for a character, and I think that it's kind of a relatable feeling, being a teenager and feeling like you're smarter than people give you credit for. I also totally get that this book isn't for everyone. I know that a lot of people feel a way about the age difference between Oliver and Elio. I definitely get that. I think that makes a lot of sense. I could definitely dig into it, maybe even play devil's advocate and say that the age difference is important to the narrative. But did he need to be 24? No. Nope. Definitely a weird choice. And it's honestly even weirder in the movie. At least with the context of the book, I can dissect it more. Like I said, it's a thoughtful book, so I don't think it was written this way for no reason. But in the end, it's up to the reader to decide if it's a deal breaker. And I totally get it if it is. Personally, I got enough out of this book despite the age difference to still give it 5 stars. Not only is it a good book to read if you're queer, I think it would be a really good read if you've experienced shame of any kind and are interested in reflecting on that at all. Back to some cozy romantic vibes. Next we have the Dangerous Damsels series by India Holton. I would not shut up about these books when I was reading them. India Holton has such whimsical ideas. I don't know how she does it. I'm so inspired. These books take place during the Victorian era with some very big magical twists. For example, this first book follows Cecilia, a very bookish, very demure woman who enjoys having tea with her aunt, as well as robbing and pillaging in their magical flying battle house, because they're also sky pirates. I was obsessed with this premise, and in its execution, it's just as insane as it sounds. Not only is the idea amazing, but India Holton's writing is so thrilling, so romantic, and just like properly laugh out loud funny. I was also a big fan of the balance between the fantasy and the romance. In each book it was done so well. One of the biggest things I look forward to in India Holton's books are these swoon-worthy moments between the main characters and the love interests. They're always just so into each other from the get-go, but there's also such good tension, and it's just so good. I actually get giddy thinking about these books. I'm truly obsessed. If there was ever a series that was written for me, it was the Dangerous Damsels series. It is just so goofy and silly and fun, and it doesn't take itself too seriously, but it also has all these like really great themes of women learning that they're more powerful than they realized, and finding someone who will love you for exactly who you are and not settling for anything less. After reading the first book, I also read through some of India Holton's Instagram posts where she talks about how being neurodivergent influences her writing and her characters, which, as someone with ADHD, I really appreciated and felt really strongly from these books. There's just something really comfortable and wonderful about seeing these really neurotic characters going on these grand adventures and finding each other. I just love every second of it. I don't think I've ever heard a more unique voice in writing. Anytime I'm reading anything India Holton writes, I feel as though I'm hearing it exactly the way she wanted to tell it. Like, she didn't hold anything back, she just went for it, she put her whole personality into it, and it's so fun. She almost even has these moments that aren't like quite breaking the fourth wall, but it's as if she's talking from the future into this setting of the past. Her newest book, which I'm reading right now, has a moment by the end where she mentions the characters feeling this feeling of adrenaline, but she knows that adrenaline hasn't been discovered in the year that it's set, so she makes some mention of it like, this is what the characters were feeling. Their hearts were racing in a way that they didn't realize was adrenaline because it wouldn't be discovered for another few years, which I thought was really funny. And it's filled with moments like that, and I think it's just so silly, and I'm really just into that. I'm currently reading her newest book called The Ornithologist's Field Guide to Love, which is the first of her new series and is about these rival professors who study magical birds. People keep asking me about it, and every time I can tell they regret asking me because I struggle so hard to explain it, but it's full of all that India Holton charm and humor that I've really come to love from her work. Okay, so we've arrived at the final book on my list. Oh boy. A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. Hear me out, guys. I'm gonna tell you a story. It has been a very busy year for me, and for a while, I was having the hardest time picking up a book and sticking with it. The solution to that ended up being audiobooks. I had a number of them on Audible that I hadn't got to yet, because I'm a big mood reader and the time just never felt right. But it was driving me crazy not having read anything fun in so long, so I decided it was time to bust out the big guns. A Court of Thorns and Roses. At first, I was not into it. The beginning is a slog, even at the higher speed I like to listen at, but then something clicked. I couldn't tell you what happened. The only conclusion I can come to is that Sarah J. Maas must have put fairy crack in this series, because by the 50% mark of this book, I was suddenly inhaling this story. And I can't even in good conscience say that it was good. Like, it was, but it wasn't. It was just so chaotic and ridiculous and kind of problematic at some points. And I loved every horrible, insane second of it. I blasted through the entire series. I had to read them all. I don't know what was going on. It was like I was possessed. Something just overcame me and I couldn't stop reading these horrible books. Reading these was like eating an excess of tooth-rotting candy. It was dense. It was sweet. It was mind-numbing almost. I can say with certainty that the third book is the worst one. Feyre is at her most infuriating in that one. I don't think she's a good character. I do not think she's a good character. But the last book, this had everything I wanted. It follows Nesta and Cassian, who are definitely my two favorite characters in the entire series. And the fact that we get dual POV, where we hadn't got that in the past, is just great. The main conflict includes Nesta being forced to live in this place called the House of Wind, which is this house that magically provides her with all she needs and sort of communicates with her through little acts of service. I really like that the house becomes sort of a character that Nesta reluctantly befriends. I think it's just so cozy and it feels so comforting. She's also forced to do these training sessions with Cassian and it's just such a good setup for tension. And guys, the amount of smut that is packed into this book is inconceivable. I had heard that this series was on the spicier side and was kind of disappointed. My reading background is primarily romance novels, so I wasn't impressed by any means. But this book? This one is not for the faint of heart. If you'd have told me that in the end it was actually something akin to Stockholm Syndrome that had me in a chokehold the whole time, I would absolutely believe you. But this specific book, this fifth book in the series, just hit me in a way that I did not expect, to the point that it has definitely earned its place on my list of favorite books. And so, after all that, we've come to the end of the video. I hope you've enjoyed spending a little time with me. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to ramble on about my favorite books. I'd love to hear what some of your favorite books are, and I'd also love to hear what your thoughts on my favorites are in the comments. From here, I do plan on using this channel for a number of things. More book content, also lots of art stuff, and the usual animated content I post on Instagram. If you are interested in following me on other platforms or in supporting my work through things like Ko-Fi or Patreon, I'll leave all those links in my description. Thank you so much for joining me and for visiting the tavern. I hope to see you again soon.